Hello everybody, so thank you, and thanks also to Christine and Andrew for the kind invitation. So today, I did my first book and on the history of spiritualism and its relationship with show business and media culture in the 19th century. Right now I'm working on a new topic, which is actually related to the history of artificial intelligence and the relationship between humans and machine. So very often I am told, well, you totally changed subject, but I actually don't believe so. So this talk is also about trying to explain and you and maybe also convince you and myself this is not the case. So, but I will start with a story, with an anecdote. We are in Boston in 1909 when the famous spiritualist medium Eusapia Palladino comes for the first time to the United States for a tour of spiritualist seances. So Palladino at the time is heralded as the most important as a medium internationally by many. And indeed her arrival is anticipated by a veritable campaign on the popular press. There are articles appearing in the first page of the New York Times and even an autobiography of Palladino that appears in the Cosmopolitan magazine, so a very popular one. And yet, despite all these good promises, her tour in the United States will not end well for Palladino. And this, especially because she will cross paths with a fierce opponent of spiritualists, Hugo Münsterberg, one of the key figures of psychology in the United States at the time, the director of the psychological laboratory at Harvard, who will be invited to participate in a seance, and he will set up in the attempt to debunk what he felt was the cheatery of Palladino. So Münsterberg went to this seance. And so basically, he managed to have a collaborator, an accomplice, coming to the seance with him. So when Palladino was focusing on him, that he was making efforts to check that everything was in order, the collaborator went down, under the table, and grasped the foot of Palladino as she was trying with a contortionist move to create these movements of the seance table that were one of his most famous manifestations. And at this moment, the medium screamed, according to Münsterberg, because she realized that she was caught. And as Münsterberg pointed out later in an article on the topic, quote, her greatest wonders are absolutely nothing but fraud and humbug. This is no longer a theory but a proven fact, unquote. So I started with this because this encounter between Münsterberg, an important figure in psychology at the time, and Palladino, this very widely celebrated medium, shows, so first, the importance of the topic of deception in the history of spiritualism. How spiritualism was also many times discussed in the public sphere in terms of how deception can occur, and how seekers and observers can be deceived. But there's also another reason why I think this encounter is particularly interesting, because Münsterberg was interested in spiritualism alongside different subjects, and at the time when he actually participated in Palladino's seance, he was working at the book that makes him still famous today, especially in the discipline of film studies. This is a classical work for film studies, which he published a few years later, called The Photoplay of Psychological Study. In this book, Münsterberg tried to look at what was at the time a new technology, cinema, trying to understand how cinema manipulated the perception of spectators in order to create a particular effect. So in a way, there was a continuity in Münsterberg's interest with Palladino and the spiritualists, and with the medium of cinema, which I think it's something that symbolizes quite well the fact that so the issue of deception is something that is so entangled with both the history of mediums and the history of media. Examples also of how also in the history of media we find this issue of deception. For instance, the famous tale, the first spectators of the cinematograph of Lumiere brothers, who saw the moving image of a train and exchanged this illusion for reality and escape, which is apocryphal, but is also part of the fact that so cinema was presented as a powerful illusion. And other examples, for instance, are the idea of the panicking audience of War of the Worlds, the radio broadcast by Orson Welles. So there is a long history of how media have been discussed in terms of how they deceive audiences and users. And I think also that the topic is quite relevant today. So today, for instance, in the last couple of years, we've seen this debate about the relationship, the role of social media in creating fake news and disseminating fake news. And so recently we've seen also other concerns about Cambridge Analytica, for instance, the scandal that concerned this company and also Facebook, and how they can actually have a deep influence in people's votes, so in political sphere. And so in this sense, what I will try to do here is to use the history of spiritualism as a way to reflect on what it means to deceive and be deceived, and also in our contemporary world. So, and to do so, I will draw on my research on spiritualism in the 19th and early 20th century, and I will stress four points that I think are quite interesting, and trying also to reflect on how these could tell us something, to understand something about what's happening today, and how deception is meaningful to our contemporary world, and especially to politics. So let's start with the first observation, the first point, which is the role of skepticism and the controversies in the spiritualist movement. So, if one there is a long history of skeptics trying to debunk spiritualists, and this usually is present in terms of a quite strong opposition. An example is the kind of dialectic, the opposition between, on the one side, spiritualist mediums, and on the other side, stage magicians. For instance, these two magicians, Maskelyne and Cook, presenting at the end of the 19th century spectacles by labeling themselves as anti-spiritualist. And of course, there are good reasons to oppose these two categories, because spiritualist mediums were producing manifestation that they offered often. Sometimes they just said, no, we don't know what it is, we just leave this for you to choose. But often they were presenting this as true manifestation, authentic manifestation of a potential spiritual communication. While stage magicians were usually openly acknowledging that they were using tricks. So of course there is a lot of this. But if we look more closely at the relationship, we see that is quite more complex than usually it is acknowledged. And one reason for this is that in these controversies, both spiritualists and magicians actually profited from such controversy. And we see this in different ways. Well, first, magicians chose spiritualists, of course, because they might have also had a kind of personal interest, but certainly they were aware that these could help them be covered in the press and attract more audiences, also thanks to the fascination that the supernatural had to many. And also spiritually. So one thing that usually struck me is that the moments where, like, the movement, the spiritualist movement had the most coverage in the press often coincided with these great controversies. So also spiritualists, although not always, but in some cases actually they cover. And you can see also that actually spiritualists were never afraid to actually call the skepticism. So, for instance, they always invited skeptics and scientists who they know were skeptics, like, for instance, Musterberg, to their seances. So they actually encourage this kind of skepticism. And if we think about the history of show business itself, so Barnum, P.T. Barnum is one of the key figures of the modern show business in the 19th century. He realizes that controversy can help a lot to advertise, to promote his attraction. And we have evidence, so historians of P.T. Barnum found evidence of him planting news to the press that pointed to the fact that his own attraction were fake, so that this could create kind of controversies, and so people would come to his shows to see if this was true or not. So we see that how this could also be so as strategies also could be used by both spiritualists and anti-spiritualists. And also in the seances, as I mentioned before, like often you find skeptics being invited in the seance in a way. So this was also part of the dramaturgy of the seances. We also have cases, documented cases of characters of performers who actually both acted as spiritualist mediums. They both gave demonstrations, presented themselves as mediums, and as stage magicians. So they actually did both things throughout their career. Which points to the interchangeability of this. So what does so as said, I'm trying now to look at this issue of deception, trying to think how this can be meaningful to our contemporary world. And so if you think, for instance, at the way the actions of a particular president in our time, I don't want to name him, who actually often are ridiculed and are the subject of great controversies. And in a way, this is seen as a way to counteract what he's doing, but it might be, and so I think there is some evidence how this has played out. It might be that also this, in a way, help also bring this kind of attention in the public sphere that might also benefit to it. This was the first point. So the second one is about the relationship between these debunkings and the reputation of mediums. And I think this is a quite interesting aspect, because so if you look at the history of spiritualism, there are a lot of so-called exposés, which were basically how they called this debunking of spiritualist mediums. A lot of very, very prominent mediums suffered exposé many times, many times throughout their careers, and yet very often they could, in a way, survive these situations, and so they managed to keep a kind of reputation among other spiritualists, and also in the public sphere. And so even Zapia Paladino wasn't the first exposé she suffered. She suffered several, but she was always managing to go by. And the arguments that sometimes spiritualists used to explain this was, for instance, that if a medium cheated once, it does not mean that she or he will always trick, which actually is actually true logically. But and then also, for instance, a spiritualist pointed out, I have seen, of course, attempts to cheat by supplementing their powers, not always meaning to do anything wrong, but perhaps to give more for the fee received than the spirits can do through them. So they were saying, for instance, that mediums were exaggerating, to give more. Although like there was a real phenomenon, but they were exaggerating just to be able to give more for the fee received. So this, I think this is interesting because in a way it suggested that so it wasn't much. So it was of course also this, but it wasn't only the situation, the circumstances of the expose that so reflected on its consequences, that informed its consequences, but it was also how this expose was communicated and discussed and managed also, because often spiritualist mediums had also managers that also helped them to organize their public exposure. And this is I think particularly interesting also because so spiritualists actually stressed always how important to them was evidence. So they said that spiritualism was a scientific religion in which they were constantly experimenting, and they were touching with their own hands evidence and providing and creating evidence of the fact that this spiritualist communication was authentic. So. And yet, at the same time, there was this evidence of cheating that was often overlooked. So sometimes, when there was evidence that pointed to the other direction, so this was overlooked. And I think this is interesting because, especially because of this relationship with science of spiritualism. Because, of course, there was this strong relationship with this idea of science of experiment. At the same time, at the end, also what counted. This was also what people believed. So what they believed about this. And I had kind of an evidence of this. Once I presented at a conference where many in the conference were actually committed believers or researching in parapsychology, and there was an interesting presentation about telepathic communication, and the speaker actually presented very thoroughly his methodological design and explained how the methodology was acting, and how also statistical patterns were used to see if the results could really point to the existence of telepathy. And at the end, the study showed that this wasn't happening. So there wasn't statistical evidence, statistically relevant evidence that this telepathic connection happened. But then at the end of the paper, he also said, yes, but also we've seen many things that are in a way strange. So this makes us think about this, because something really might have happened if this person and didn't. So there was really the coexistence of this aspect of trying to do thorough scientific experiment, and at the same time trying to also to call to the element of what people actually believe. And I think this is interesting also because of the way in which trust in the public arena is constructed. And so, for instance, because of politicians, so of course I'm not making a comparison between politicians and mediums, but politicians, like mediums, rely a lot on trust, and we see this. So how different things that happen in their personal life and so can be communicating with very different outcomes. So also in this case, I think that this make us think about this element. So the third point is the relationship between science and popular culture and spiritualism. And for this, again, just something about Palladino. Palladino, when she was in the United States, the one with Museberg was not the only expose that she suffered. She also suffered one at Columbia University. Some professors at Columbia University invited her to do an experimental seance, but actually this was no normal seance. It was a trap that they prepared for Palladino. They all tried to be sympathetic, to make her feel that they were sympathetic with her mediumship, and they believed in her. But then two magicians actually crawled under the table to observe and grasp her feet. So she was trapped, and she was again caught cheating, trying to move the table with her feet. And So it is interesting because also, as I mentioned, Palladino had been exposed, has been found cheating. So of course there were controversies also on these episodes, but many times in their career, and they always managed to survive these moments of controversy. So after this, some asked also why the exposure on Palladino was so effective in this time, because she never actually recovered from this failure of the American tour. She was as successful as she was before, after this moment. And so the reason might be different. So for instance, it might be the fact that she was at the end of her career. It might be the fact that the manager who was working with her in the United States didn't support her in the right way. But a very interesting answer was given by a psychologist Hislop, who wrote in the Journal of the American Society for Psychiatric Research. Hislop noted that Carrington, the manager of Palladino, and Palladino herself had used what he called vaudeville methods, in the sense that they had, for instance, made a campaign on the press. They did a demonstration of a seance in front of journalists. So they tried to really set their tours, so in the show business, so in kind of popular culture. But they didn't expect, Hislop noted, that also the scientists would do the same, because the scientists who debunked her also did not do it actually in the scientific laboratory, but instead in the public arena. They wrote articles in the same newspapers and magazines where Palladino and Carrington were writing, and they also tried to cheat her, like lying to her, having someone coming under the table. So they used tactics that were similar to the tactics that they accused her of using. And so in a way, so we see this moment in which scientists use the same strategies as mediums and their managing, and also because at the time what was of interest, for instance, to Musterberg was also the authority of particular strands of psychology. There were many psychologists who still thought the psychiatric research was a very important part of psychology, and these phenomena were very important to be studied. Musterberg was not one of them, and so what he was trying also was to push his vision of what established academic psychology should be. And to do so, he actually worked in the arena of popular culture, of the public arena of newspapers, of this kind of handbags, not in the arena of scientific journals and so on. So here, I think it's seen as the involvement of scientists in a mediatized public debate where the legitimacy of science is negotiated, so within the public sphere. And so I think this is also something that is interesting in our contemporary world. So if we think about debates such as global warming, vaccination, we also see that in these cases we have debates on scientific topics and also on topics that are also political, that actually happen, so follow dynamics that are divergent from the discussion in the scientific community and political institutions. So the real field where these controversy happen is actually the public arena, popular culture, and journalism. The fourth and last point, and last observation about the role of deception in spiritualism has to do not with mediums but with the observers. And so in a spiritual seance we would call them sitter. So until now, in the other 3 points, I have started from the history of spiritualism, and then I moved into the present, to try to look at it. But so now I'd like to do the opposite thing. So I start with actually artificial intelligence, and especially personal assistants such as Siri or Alexa, that respond to requests of users through the voice. I'm now studying the genealogy of this technology, and something that is interesting is that they try. This technology is also work by so we could say exploiting, but is a negative word. But so to use also our tendency to attribute humanity or to objects. Yeah. So of course, like we know always when we talk with Alexa or Siri that they are actually just programs, the computer programs. But at the same time, the fact that they use a human voice, usually a female voice, although not always, and that, for instance, they use also particular style of conversation, because, for instance, Siri is much more ironic, has a different style than other personal assistants. This informs how we interact with them. It makes us probably also feel as this interaction as more natural and more in this sense it helps us to integrate them in our domestic environment or in our everyday life. An interesting thing about the research on how people react to these kind of bots or artificial intelligence agents is been made by some computer scientists such as Bickmore and Pickard, who noted that actually what happens is not what we call a suspension of disbelief, but a suspension of belief. Suspension of disbelief is used in fiction usually to signal the fact that we accept events that usually we wouldn't accept in our everyday life, for instance, in an horror movie, in order to be able to engage emotionally in a film that we watch or in a book that we read, even if we wouldn't believe in what happens. Yeah. So what they say is that there isn't such thing. We don't suspend disbelief, but actually there is a suspension of belief. Our experience has been that belief in computer agents acting like a person is automatic from the first moment of an interaction. It is this belief which must be suspended by the user when the agent fails to meet their expectations by behaving inappropriately. So there is a suspension of belief. If we have evidence that they are not human, then we start to treat them as non-humans. Yeah, and this is a break. I think this is interesting if one looks at the history of spiritualism, because spiritualism has been often about the interpretation of signals, of signs, noises, like for instance the spirit rappings that were the first manifestation observed by with the first mediums, considered first mediums of history, the Fox sisters, and then many other manifestations. This idea of if you are there, give me a signal. So it was a lot about how you interpret this noise as a meaningful communication. So this was connected also to the fact that spiritualism was often accused of being materialist, because, for instance, spiritualist pointed out that it is necessary to break the ice of materialism and skepticism by first demonstrating to our senses of seeing, hearing and feeling that spirits do exist, unquote. So there was all these signs that were taken as evidence that there was, and I think in a way this suggests something that is close to what happens when we interact with machines and so on. It suggests the fact that there's also an interest, a wish in giving life, in projecting life also into things, into artifacts, into technologies. And I was thinking about this the other day when I take up my phone, and I asked to Siri, the personal assistant of my iPhone, "Hey Siri, do you believe in spirits?" To which Siri, quite enigmatically, replied, "I don't believe that I have beliefs." Thank you very much.